One of my guys had been shot in the opening minutes of that battle, kind of high and left on his chest. We were kind of pinned. We were stuck there while we were trying to treat Matthew, call in fire, deal with the Taliban here. I knew they were going to try and flank us around the south. So the snipers were firing to cut guys that were coming around to cut us off. So it was busy. And I was sitting there just going, holy shit, I'm in over my head here. And I've gotten my whole team in over our heads.
Welcome to Combat Story. I'm Ryan Fugit, and I served warzone tours as an Army attack helicopter pilot and CIA officer over a 15-year career. I'm fascinated by the experiences of the elite in combat. On this show, I interview some of the best to understand what combat felt like on their front lines. This is Combat Story. Today we hear the combat story of Mark Wales, a former Australian SAS officer who spent 16 years in the Australian military, including 6 years in the elite SAS. He led special operators as a troop commander and completed 10 deployments to Afghanistan, Iraq, East Timor, Lebanon, and the Solomon Islands. Mark would go on to earn an MBA from the prestigious Wharton School of Business and then worked at McKinsey Company. He has since written the book Survivor: Life in the SAS, was on Australian Survivor, and competed in the Bear Grylls World's Toughest Race Eco Challenge Fiji 2019, which I highly recommend watching on Amazon with your family. And since all this isn't enough, Mark also founded Kill Kapture, a tough luxury e-commerce brand, and is now a sought-after keynote and motivational speaker. I hope you enjoy Mark's honest, self-deprecating, and relatable combat story as much as I did. Hey Mark, thanks for taking the time to share your story today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So you're the first Aussie I've had on the program, which probably happens often for you, I'm sure. I know you've done a lot of interviews. But regardless of nationality, I put you into this category of people. I don't have a name for it yet, but it's the people that make me feel lazy as hell. So I know we touched on the intro here, but just going through some of these: SAS, Wharton, McKinsey, speaker, 2 TV shows that I know of, Kill Kapture, like entrepreneur. So I was really pleased as I read Survivor, which I really enjoyed, that you have some levity in there that brings you down to earth for a lot of the rest of us. So I wanted to start out with something I read in the book. I have a 14-year-old son. I'm wondering if you can tell us about the first interaction you have at a brothel, and what that meant for what that was like for your life.
I got to tell you, I was in a cold sweat when I thought at one point, I'm like, my goodness, I'm going to have to put this in the book, because and part of the thinking was, and for anyone who, a lot of people probably haven't read it, but when I was 14, I lived in Western Australia, which is kind of the Wild West. Even in Australia, it's considered pretty isolated. But me and my mate had this great idea. We just got a part-time job. Hey, let's go do a run on a brothel and see what we can see. And so it turned into a whole episode. I was very lucky to get away with it, and I didn't tell a soul my whole life. I was so embarrassed about it. I didn't tell a soul. And then when I was writing the book, I'm like, if I don't share some of this kind of stupid shit that I'm embarrassed about, I'm just not going to be a relatable protagonist, I think. So I hate reading books where you hear about this person that's done everything great, and I didn't want that. I wanted you to see me, unfortunately, as I am, which is very human and very flawed. And I've done some good things, but I've done some stupid things as well.
Oh man, it's a great story in the book. And there are many, but just like the way, we don't need to get into details, but could you just describe the waiting room? Because I found this hilarious, especially thinking that you're 14 and how you talked your way into it.
I went to this old kind of colonial building. It looked really innocuous. And I'm like, oh, this is interesting. And when I went in, there was this kind of lounge room area where there were a bunch of girls sitting. They kind of came in looking bored, off their shift. And, one was doing post-grad high school work, not high school work, post-grad homework. And I sat there with my mate, and I'm just thinking, what are we doing here? And so I thought, we're here now and we're committed, so we'll go through with it.
Oh, that's great. So since we're talking about growing up in Western Australia, could you just talk a little bit more about what was your life like as a kid? I mean, like many guys I end up interviewing, especially from these tier 1 elements, super driven from the time you hit the military on. Were you like that as a kid?
Yeah, as a kid, I grew up in coastal Western Australia, which is, there's just nothing there. It's like I think that state is the size of kind of about a third of our continent. It's pretty huge. It's like the probably a third the size of the US. So it's a huge state, and there was only a couple of million people there. So we had the run of the place. And I was born up north in a mining town, which was just 800 people, and there was nothing there. And so we grew up like that. Not much supervision. This is in the days when there was just nothing really we had to worry about. There was a low crime rate out there, so very much a free range childhood. And I didn't get an idea about the military until I was in high school, and I saw some pictures of the Brit SAS doing the Iranian embassy siege in London. And I just thought, holy shit, look at that. And I thought, how do I become one of those guys, all clad in black? Like, that's as cool as shit. And that's kind of what got me started. I realized Australia, we had our own unit as well, which was exciting to hear.
So I interviewed one of the guys on that raid. In fact, very interesting story. Just kind of where he went into the building and what went down afterwards. Fascinating.
Wow,
fascinating stuff. And it was like it was all captured. I mean, it was in London, so the pictures of the guys with
live on TV
was awesome. All right, so you kind of see that image, and then maybe that puts the military in your mind. Was there any family history in the military? Did that play into the decision at all?
No, my grandfather had fought in World War II in Mauritania, I think. It was like in the Pacific Islands. Sorry, my boy is trying to get. And he had talked about fighting the Japanese. I remember it quite well. And thanks. Coffee delivery.
Yeah. It's a different time there for you. So
yeah, exactly.
Understandable.
That's my 3-year-old. But yeah, he talked about fighting the Japanese on Mauritania and how brutal that was. And I remember him showing me that samurai sword I talk about in the book, but he showed me a samurai sword he had taken from a Japanese officer. And I just remember seeing and thinking, whoa, that's really heavy. Like, it's just intense to think that once upon a time, our forefathers were fighting like that. And I didn't really grasp. You knew it was bad, but you don't really grasp it, I think, when you're a kid. But no one else had been in the military. In fact, a lot of people tried to talk me out of it, but I was like, you don't know what I know. We've got a really cool unit, and it'll be a great thing to join.
Were there people in your family trying to talk you out of it? Because I think if I recall, you're one of 3 brothers, right? You're in the middle.
Yeah.
So did they go in, or were they pushing against you? Or
no, it was my parents. They're like, have you thought about, people who join the military kind of shit kickers and that, it's kind of a hard job. I'm like, yeah. Like, have you thought about joining the Air Force or the Navy? I was like, no, I'm not doing that. And so, I just stuck at it and had that goal of joining. We have a defense academy, which is kind of similar to West Point. And that's where I started my officer training.
I actually wanted to ask about that. Could you talk through what that looks like for you? Again, the first time I've interviewed somebody from the Australian military. What is the pipeline for an officer going in?
Yeah, we have a joint service academy, which is you do 3 years at your undergrad degree, whatever you choose to do there. And then we go across to a strictly military academy. If you're Army, you go to a strictly military academy called Duntroon. And that's where you get your really, your detailed officer training. When you graduate, you're a lieutenant and you're a platoon commander. So that's 4 years worth of training to get in the officer track. And I was 17 when I joined, and 20, just turned 21 when I left.
Does that 3-year undergrad experience, is that the only way in to the 1-year program, or is there some other feeder program?
Yeah, there's direct entry. You can go, you don't actually have to have an undergrad. You can go directly to that academy. You do a slightly longer course, like 18 months instead. We call them bakers. And
why is that?
Fresh baked. They call us facts, which is F and advocates. And so we have this rivalry between the two parties, but everyone graduates and it's always a good crew.
When, at least on our side of the service, when you're going through the training college on the officer track, you're competing the whole time for what branch you want to get. And then, it's just competitive across the board. Then once you're in that, if it's infantry or aviation or whatever, then you're competing for an assignment or an aircraft or something else. What was it like for you guys? When do you kind of decide, all right, I'm going infantry or I'm doing something else?
Yeah, towards the end of that year training, you've chosen your corps, and I was going for infantry. And the important thing is you want to choose the right unit. So we have the light infantry and the mechanized units and all that. And we had just started deployments to East Timor, which is a peacekeeping mission. First real operational missions we'd had in a really long time. I think, we had a pretty strong contingent in Vietnam, but East Timor was the first kind of warlike operation there'd been in a while. And so I was competing for the unit that was going to go there next. Yeah.
Is it really hard to get into the infantry track as you're going through the pipeline?
It's not hard to get in the infantry track, but it's hard to get into the top units, like the highly regarded kind of light infantry units. That's a bit harder. Yeah.
And then, I'm curious because we're talking East Timor. We're talking the 90s, right? At the time, late 90s.
Yeah, late 90s.
And for us, it kind of felt the same way. Like, had the Gulf War, but really before that, it was Vietnam, and there had just not been a lot happening. So it's interesting that you had this one place where not one place, but an area of operations to go to. For us, I guess it may have been Kosovo and Bosnia at the time.
Yeah.
What was the feeling like being a young officer going in about, hey, am I going to get my shot to go and do something? Like, was that weighing on your mind at all?
I just knew that it was that particular area had the massacre that had happened there in the wake of the independence vote was really bad. There were a lot of people killed, and it was really primitive stuff, machetes and just a lot of violence. And so I felt like it was a really good mission for us to go there and stabilize the place. But there was still a lot of, I knew there was still a lot of militia around, and I was going to be glad to get my team out into the jungle and actually do some operations on the border of Indonesia. And I was so young. I just saw some footage of it the other day. I was 21. I had no idea what I was doing, but luckily had some really good NCOs, and, I worked hard with them, and we did a 7-month tour, and it ended up being really good. We didn't see combat, but it was just a good introduction to operations.
You say something in the book that really resonated. I'm sure it would with any officer or NCO, but I think you said something to the effect of, these guys had a really vested interest, your NCOs, in me being proficient or getting up to speed quickly, right?
Yeah.
In the U.S. Army, I mean, it's certainly that way, where you have a young officer and these NCOs that have been around for years doing this, and they have to kind of break in this younger officer. What's the dynamic like in the Australian military for that?
It's good because, classic, like, in the films, the gunnery sergeant, grizzled and knows what he's doing. But I think if you're a young officer, you got to remember you bring a lot to the party as well. You're a critical thinker. You know how to plan. You're organized. You're disciplined. You bring a lot of skills that small teams need. So I think anyone who's young or starting out, just remember you're trained and ready for that role, and you bring something completely unique to it. And I think the best teams are the ones that use all those different advantages. It's not just the sergeant leading, it's everyone doing the work together.
And in the book, at least, you're very self-deprecating early on, kind of talking about it's almost like you're lucky to have made it to where you are as you enter the military, but clearly, you advance so far there, and then what you do afterwards. I wonder, did something happen when you were at military school or when you started your training where you just felt like you were in your element and able to apply yourself to this lifestyle that you had always been looking forward to? Was there some change that took place for you?
Yeah, I knew that I was excited about it, right? And I think that's a big indicator for me in life. If there's something I enjoy or I think about a lot, or I'm always excited to do it, it's probably something you're going to be good at eventually. Even if you're not good at it at the start, your learning curve is going to be better than most others. And I feel like that was the military for me. I wasn't super great when I started with tactics and that, but because I was interested and excited about it and asked a lot of questions and learned, I was able to kind of climb that curve a bit quicker. I think that's the key, just kind of, trying to keep that self-improvement going.
Yeah. You kind of, it seems like you had a lot of self-confidence, or at least how you not portrayed yourself, how you interacted with people early on. And I think it's really tough for junior officers to have that. So it's kind of interesting to see the progression there. I wonder, could I ask you to talk us through what that initial training is like for the conventional side of the service, right? So you're an infantry officer. What does that look like from the time you graduate? You're done with your college, you're an officer now. How does that program look like?
Yeah, so you go straight into the battalions, and Australia has most of our battalions are situated in the north of Australia, which is closer to the tropics. So Darwin and Townsville. So they're all super warm areas, actually. I went up there. I was excited to get away from Canberra, which is bloody freezing. But I went up to Townsville, got attached to a new platoon, met my kind of company commander, quickly realized that it was a hell of a lot more relaxed in the battalions than it was in the training institutions, which was good. And I think for me, it was just that, this is a training program we're going to have. I expect you to go through this training with your guys. This is my company commander speaking to me. Go through, do this training with you guys. You're going to make a lot of mistakes early, and totally fine. I'm just going to be watching you and helping you learn. And so it was just a classic case of going through all those drills and rehearsals and attacks and urban ops and all those things you do that you're not experienced with, that slowly you improve with as a team.
And this was pre-deployment training to go to East Timor?
Yeah, that's right. We had about 8 months, and we went towards the end of 2001. So September 11 happened, and then we left about a month later.
Damn. What was September 11th like for you, seeing that happen in Australia?
Well, I had seen the World Trade Center only a year before. I'd been over to the US for a holiday, and I remember seeing the buildings, and I knew how huge they were. And when I'd heard about the attack, you just had that feeling that things were going to be very different. There was going to be a war. I think everyone knew that. I just think people didn't know how it was going to pan out, and I don't think people expected it to. It's been, those wars have gone for a long, long time, but I think everyone knew there was going to be some revenge, and yeah, it was just one of those really defining moments, wasn't it?
For us, I will say and so I commissioned in 2002. So I was kind of watching this play out, and we all had kind of the Gulf War in mind, and like, oh my God, this thing's going to be over in like 4 months. Got to get into the fight. And I mean, how naive looking back.
Yeah.
What it became.
Yeah. First time I went to Afghanistan for a combat tour was 2007. And I was like, quick, hurry up. It's going to be wound down before the end of the year. And, wasn't even getting started, really.
God. So I'd like to spend just a little time on East Timor, but I do want to back up just a bit, because there was another item in the book that I found really interesting, which was when you're training on how to throw a grenade. Yeah. And I wonder if you could talk us through this one before we get to your Superman story.
This was hilarious. We were doing grenade throws as part of it was like a final part of training, actually. And I'd been throwing a few that day, and we were training each other to be safety staff. And I was in the pit with my mate, and it was the last like 3 grenades of the day, and no one wanted to throw them. And I'm like, hell yeah, I'll throw them. And went in the pit, and I threw one, and that was fine. And I was starting to get I wasn't quite doing the drill properly. I was getting a bit confident with it. And I threw one, and I've just I don't know what happened. I think the lever caught on my hand, but it basically fell right in front of me on the edge of the bay. And I just remember, I'd never seen a grenade in front of me with no dressing on, no safety pin, no lever. And I'm just like, holy shit. And I knew we had about 4 seconds to get out of there. And me and my mate ran off. And this grenade exploded. No one got hurt, luckily. But like I was saying in the book, I found out years later, they still use it as an example of, doesn't matter how big you are, big, strong guys. I've seen this one dude totally screw a throw up and nearly kill everyone. so I'm still using it as an example at the training establishment, which is funny.
Did you not get crushed by whoever was running that course afterwards?
No, they were just happy no one was dead, and that funnily enough, the sergeant watching it was actually more excited about it than we were. He's like, "God, you guys got out of there. You did the right thing," and but I was mocked mercilessly by my mates. So yeah.
Oh man. Okay. So as you're training up with with your team, getting ready to go to East Timor, in your mind somewhere, is there like, hey, down the road, I want to go to SAS or do something a little different? Or were you just, hey, I'm happy to get into
Yeah.
some type of action here?
Yeah, there was already a battalion in place in East Timor when we went there to take over. So when we got there, we handed over the units that were already there. The facilities were super basic. Like Australia had a really atrophied military back then. We had our logistics was terrible, and we had the bases were they were just woeful. And I compare that to 10 years later when we were in Afghanistan, they were much better. But back then we had super basic facilities, and we're just doing these security ops up and down the border with West Timor. So for me, I wanted to understand what had happened in the country, and also to try and learn a bit of the language. So which is Tedem. It's Portuguese kind of based language. Used to be a Portuguese colony. So there's a lot of super old forts there from the 16th century, and Portuguese is a strong part of their language. So I learned a fair bit of that just to try and interact with locals and use that to just be a part of the population a bit more.
And the idea, were you guys going in, you said to do peacekeeping ops, but you were training like urban environment. Is that what it ended up being when you got there?
It's a super poor country. So it was really basic kind of hilltop villages and places like that. And the places we worked in mostly were kind of close country because East Timor, you're close to the tropics there. So a lot of rainforest. So it was a lot of kind of green roles, working in close country stuff, which Australia, actually, we specialize in a lot of that because of the nature of all the places we fought in World War II and in Vietnam. It was pretty much jungle dominated. So luckily we've got a good background in that type of work in Australia.
And were you guys out in the jungles during that deployment?
Yeah, we used to go out for a week or two at a time and, set up on these borders and watch the foot traffic and try and stay hidden. And yeah, we're just making sure there's no militia coming across from Indonesia, which was West Timor, into East Timor to harass the locals.
And without trying to sound flippant here, was there a hope that you get into some type of an engagement? Because I do feel like, at least on the US side, when you're first going in somewhere, you're like, let's just get this on. This is why we're here. But when, it's not a peacekeeping mission. So I'm just curious what that may have been like.
Yeah, it's weird. You don't hope for it, but you also want to prove yourself as well, right? Like, because you're there to do the work. And so you're kind of there going, well, if someone tries us on, at least we're ready to go for it. So there's always that in the back of your mind. Like, you knew it could be dangerous, but I felt like we were always kind of ready for it too. And there'd been some skirmishes. They weren't like pitched battles, but there'd been a couple of times where guys had caught militia teams and been in battles. And the SAS had actually been in a couple of pretty solid ones. So it wasn't totally innocuous an area.
Okay, perfect. So, I know you said, look, you guys weren't involved in any gunfights necessarily, but still, when there's the potential for it, it's your first time leading troops in a situation like this. I'm sure it still feels like a heavy weight. Could you just talk about maybe the first patrol you went on, if you can remember, kind of just what did it feel like for you? Were you a platoon leader or equivalent, something like that at the time?
Yeah, I was the platoon leader. I remember I think we got inserted somewhere by some kind of dodgy Russian helicopters, a couple of Mi-7s or something, super dodgy. And, we landed and fanned out to a couple of villages. And I think I realized pretty quickly, like, these people just live really basic lives. They live in villages, they farm, they want a bit of security for their kids and economic support. And so I remember going through the villages and realizing this is just a very different life compared to how we live in Australia. So that to me, that difference was really stark. They were such a poor country. And I realized that, they just want the same things we do.
And were you guys doing kind of like long moving patrols in that setting?
Yeah, we would. We'd cover a fair bit of ground. Sometimes we'd be out for we'd stay out for as long as we could. We might do 9 days at a time without resupply. So we carried not much food. Yeah, it was super, yeah, a long time. And the idea is there, once you're in the environment, you want to stay there just because it's much easier to get a gauge on what's going on. And so a couple of times I was eating literally a handful of food a day because we just didn't have the supplies that we could carry with us. Yeah. And sometimes, and for food and, for water, we just catch a bit of water off our tarps during the day and use that.
And was this a small unit that you were moving around with, or was it at the company level?
Platoon. So, 25, 30 guys. Yeah. Small unit.
So it was you, like you were the one in charge for that. How did that feel, man? And so I guess for context, the wars that I am familiar with, most of the folks had already been there, or when moving in, it was a significant size force. But to be out on your own, your first rotation, and you're cruising around for 9 days in the jungle, how did that, what was the wait like for you?
Yeah, it was good because I felt like we earned that trust to a point. So we might get, at the start, get a shorter job and it's not as mobile and you've got a platoon nearby. And it was just a case of if I keep proving that I can do these jobs reliably, I'll get a bit more kind of freedom and a bit more trust. And that's how it felt. And then towards the end, we're doing these long patrols just on our own. And that was, it was super cool. I really loved that. And I think it was motivating for everyone because they were like, we're out here on our own. We got to do this properly. And so that trust that was invested in us was really, that was cool. Because then it was like, no one's going to come and get us. If we're in trouble, it's just us.
Yeah. Was there any air support or, nothing?
There was just like, you might be able to get some Black Hawks occasionally. There was nothing out there really. But it's not a huge AO as well. Like it's only maybe 300 kilometers wide. So you could get, if you really needed help quick, you could get it from one of the bases and you get evac and whatnot.
Wow.
Yeah. Right. Super cool.
So how long was that deployment for you then? What was that time frame?
That was 7 months. And so it was the end of 2001, start of 2002.
And then you come back from that. Do you then make the transition over to SAS, or do you have to spend more time on the conventional side before making that?
I still stay conventional for a bit longer because we actually had another deployment to the Solomon Islands. We ended up going to Guadalcanal, which which is where the Marines and all you guys landed way back at the start of World War II, really. And we were actually right near Alligator Creek, which was the site of a huge battle. I think there was like 1,000 Japanese killed in one night due to Banzai charges. This is way back at the start of the war. When the Marines had just landed and were headed inland to go take Henderson Airfield. So we were there and we knew this was a kind of cool, one of the early battles of World War II, Battle of Savo Island and a few other areas around Guadalcanal. And ours was another stabilization mission. There were a few gangs there that were heavily armed. So we basically went in there with the police force and helped disarm some of the gangs. I think we did a weapon buyback kind of scheme. And so there were all these really cool World War II rifles coming in from the islands. And I was like, some of them were getting cut up as scrap. And there was a tear in my eye with some of them. They were beautiful weapons like 303s and M14s. But and so that was another deployment we did. And then after that, that's when I applied for selection.
Okay. So I'm curious if you took your grandfather's route where you took one of those items back with you, like one of the weapons. He took the sword, right? Did you somehow?
I took a couple of 50 cal rounds from Henderson Airfield. I got a EOD guy to kind of render them inert, and then I took them home. I don't know how the hell I got them through customs, but yeah, I got a few 50 cal rounds at home.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Oh man. Okay.
Yeah.
So during that deployment, were you still a platoon leader? Do you advance? Like, do you move to an XO role? How does that work? Yeah,
I was a platoon leader, but I was in the support company, which is like we have in the support company, we have recon, we have assault pioneers, which is kind of like a light engineer platoon. And that was mine. We had small craft, we had explosives training, and it was cool. Super cool.
Nice. Did you end up using any of that during the deployment?
Oh, we had the boats. We had some of the Zodiacs with us, and we used them for island transits. We'd take police out to the islands, and I mean, we had super basic training. I don't know how we didn't get in more trouble, but we were shipping them around. At one time, we launched off a boat about kind of 7 or 8 kilometers off the coast and went in at night. And yeah, we were doing all these things we just weren't really trained to do, but we kind of made it work.
That is awesome. All right. So you come back from that. It sounds like you've had your heart set on going to selection. How hard was it to just start the process?
Yeah, it was. I think recognizing that, oh my God, I'm actually in a position to do this now. That was and then applying and getting the paperwork back, and there's a training program in there. I was like, holy shit, I'm actually going to be doing this.
For real. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, it's for real. And just the fear there, because everyone's heard the stories of what the selection course is like. But I also think there's a bit of bias in there. Like, you hear the most about it from people that come back and have failed at it. So it kind of makes sense that they may have inflated the difficulty of it or whatnot, because it is hard. But if they've failed, then maybe they have an interest in inflating the difficulty of it a bit more. But I mean, it was a bit of a boogie monster. Everyone has heard about the selection course and knows it's rough. So, yeah.
But was it not as hard as you expected based on that? Because you kind of went in with the boogie monster mentality?
Yeah, I went in totally expecting worst case scenario, totally. And so every day that I survived, I was like, wow, I survived another day in, this apparent hell. And it was super hard. And there's those really low moments, but it can't be hellish for 3 weeks straight. Like, there's got to be patches that are hard and patches that aren't as hard. So again, it was just a case of riding out the bad bits.
And from reading about it, it sounds very similar to kind of British SAS selection, Delta for us, probably all based on that same system. You mentioned an officer section or segment of it for like 96 hours. I've not heard that before on our side. It might happen. I don't think I've interviewed somebody who's had to go through that. But could you just talk a little bit, like, what was that iteration like, being pulled out as an officer to do this other segment?
Yeah, everyone had heard about the officer module in selection. So we're all going through it together. And then at one point, I think we're about a week in, they said, all right, everyone, we're doing this navigation exercise for 72 hours. Everyone, the following people come with me. And it was all the officers, right? And so I went with the instructors, and I knew it was the start of the officer module. And so they gave us a series of leadership activities and then some really unusual scenarios. They're like, all right, you're going to come up with a plan for this. You got 2 hours. Here's like 1 million pieces of paper and maps. Sort out your plan now, and you're going to be briefing, us in 2 hours. And so 2 hours later, we'd walk into a room, and there's the top, SAS commanders, one that just had invaded the Western Desert of Iraq and, he existed only in legend. And here you are about to brief him on some kind of half-assed plan you've come up with at 3 a.m. And so they were looking at us under pressure. They're like, can this person assimilate information? Can they prioritize what they're trying to do? Can they come up with a coherent plan in a short period of time? And can they present it well? That's kind of what they were looking at. And then they get us to go out in teams and do these scenarios. They're like, all right, we're going to go here. We're going to put an ambush in. We're going to recover a hostage here. You're going to lead it. And they just watch us work together with no food and sleep and just see what we were like.
Man, does that segment, I mean, it sounds like it's a short segment compared to the rest of the program, but does that weed a few officers out through that?
Yeah, I think so, because they start to see that some either aren't prepared or don't have the mindset necessary, because a lot of the planning jobs they were giving us were just really weird things that we never got taught. They're like, all right, there's going to be a tsunami just hit Samoa, organize a plan to fly and evacuate all the Australians. And so you hear these things that you just never had to do before, and you just have to be creative about it. I think at some point they would see that some people would adapt to that and others wouldn't. And I think that's where they started weeding people out.
I wonder if you could share maybe one or two of the more difficult moments during selection that you described, because I want to touch on something after that you share where you have to kind of describe your weaknesses to someone. And I think it would resonate with a lot of people. So I was just hoping you might set us up with like, what were some of the difficulties or points where you felt like I might not make it?
Yeah, there was one part where I was badly injured. About halfway through, I'd accumulated some injuries. I had a really strained knee, and my other foot had really severe blisters. And that's kind of, that's going to happen at some point because of the work you're doing. But I couldn't cover the distance. We were on a solo navigation exercise. And this is something fairly unique, I think, to SAS selection, is that expectation that you can work alone for a long time with no feedback and complete uncertainty. That's actually quite hard to do. And so I was out there on my own in the middle of this coastal desert, just dying, trying to take steps. So I could barely walk. And I was just like, holy shit, I'm not going to finish this, because I just wasn't covering the distance. And luckily I found an aid station, got some bandaging done on my foot, and off I went. I had to make up a lot of lost ground. But over the next couple of days, my injuries started to heal, which I think a lot of people don't understand, is that if you stay in it long enough, all the things that are going wrong with your body can actually start to repair themselves. And I think it's a shock at the start of anything like this, like adapting to it is really difficult. But once you're in it for a while, you do turn around and improve. And so I was able to kind of come out of that I think I nearly failed. There's no doubt I nearly failed in that phase.
But why do you think that the timing of it makes you think that?
Yeah, you've got to cover in 5 days. You've got to cover a certain amount of distance, like 130 kilometers or 120 kilometers. And I got there at sundown on the last day, so I was like out of time. I nearly missed the cutoff. Yeah.
So there's this moment in the book where you're talking to the cadre there, right? And for some reason, they're asking you like, "What are your weaknesses?" And you say, "I'm sometimes slow to pick things up, but I work on comprehension, and once I've grasped the concepts, I move quickly. And sometimes I'm not punctual," which I thought was funny. Do you feel that that's still true for you? That kind of these weaknesses, like as you were younger, maybe you observed it in the military. Is this still consistent? I definitely associate with this.
Yeah, I think that they don't. No one expects someone to arrive and say, "Guess what? I'm a completely perfect candidate." You do have weaknesses. It doesn't matter who you are. You have weaknesses, and I think it's your job to know what they are and to be okay with them. For me, it might be quickness of comprehension. There might be some straightforward concept they're trying to explain to me that I won't get. But for me, sometimes I would take a lot. I would get momentum in an idea, and once I had it, I was fine. Sometimes I was just slower off the mark than other guys. It just meant that I had to work a little bit harder in that field. What offsets that is all the other distinct advantages. There might be some spikes in your characteristics. You might have really high levels of self-control. You might have really high levels of humor in adversity. That stuff's worth a lot to a team. And those are the things they're looking for that are going to offset those weaknesses. So I think for anyone who's trying to go down that path is like, know what your weaknesses are and don't give them bullshit. Like people will say, "Oh, my weakness is I don't suffer fools and, I'm a perfectionist." Like bullshit. That's a strength dressed up as a weakness. So be honest, tell them what you think is a weakness, but understand that you have a whole bunch of other, skills and advantages that they're going to want.
Yeah. Where does that you're not often punctual come from?
I think I was just clutching at straws there. Like, give him some more. Yeah, give him some more.
All right. So just before we move off from selection, it's a storied event that we hear about, whether it's the UK side of the house, yours, the Delta side. Is there something about selection that you think is misperceived or misunderstood that you might only understand if you go through it?
Yeah, it's. I think when people look at those things, I think this is going to be physically really hard. It's going to be mostly physical. I need to be strong and fit to get through this. I'd say it's kind of inverted. For me, it was about 30% physical, 70% was mental acumen, mental endurance, mental capabilities, and then your own personal characteristics and values that you bring to selection that you're kind of born with and conditioned with over the years. The physical is really just, they expect you to be at a threshold level of fitness, and just make sure you're above that. Make sure you can pass the tests, but you don't need to be some physical specimen. You need to be someone that doesn't give up under pressure, someone that cooperates with their team no matter how bad things are going, someone that accepts responsibility when things aren't going well, someone that will just persevere no matter how bad it gets. That is the part that counts. The physical part really doesn't matter that much.
It's perfect. Yeah. I hear that all the time. Actually, a lot of the guys I talk to will say not just the mental piece, but they almost all recall showing up with these guys who look like Superman. And they're like, by the end, it's these wiry, smaller guys that are making it through.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. There was all shapes and sizes, right? And I was actually, I was a bigger guy. Like I'm, about 230 pounds. So for an SAS guy, everyone said that to me. They're like, these guys are endurance based. You've got to have endurance, but like, let them decide that you're not right. Don't you pull yourself off or not go. Let them decide. Don't be talked out of it by someone else.
So as you roll out a selection, my guess is you go through considerable training on the back end, right? After you get out of that. As you arrive at your first unit, are you thrown into a leadership position right away as a junior? You're not a junior officer anymore, but as like a fresh officer out of training, are you then leading SAS soldiers?
Yeah, you get allocated to a troop. And so not everyone necessarily goes to a troop right away. You might go into a operations role or something like that. And that could be because there's just not enough positions, or, you might not have been deemed suitable just yet to go to a troop. I was able to get to a troop straight away, and I got the first jobs we had were small teams of about kind of 6 of us going to the Middle East, which had kind of just been open for Australian forces. And we were escorting, we were doing basically bodyguard work. We were planning and taking politicians and generals through the Middle East to get them to the battlefields and to meet the troops that were there at the time.
And so I know in the book, you kind of describe it as you almost feel like a parent to some degree, like taking care of, making sure nothing happens to your kid.
Yeah.
Planning everything out. Could you just talk through, this is your first time deployed with this unit you'd worked your whole life to get to. What was the feeling like going in?
Oh yeah, it was incredible. So I remember going away with the soldiers was great. We all knew each other well because it's a small unit. A lot of people that trained me during the selection, during the reinforcement cycle, were the ones I then deployed with. So we know each other really well, and there's a lot of trust, and people know that you've got the standard needed to do the work. But when we got it, deploying to the Middle East was so interesting because I'd only heard about it, right? And when you see it, when you land in Kuwait and you see the sunset and hear the call to prayer and the smell of the it's a really cool place. You feel like you're on Tatooine, right? Like it's super cool. And then I saw some of the American military machine, like how big it is and how much of a footprint you guys can hold in one place. And I remember taking military aircraft all the way around to Afghanistan and landing in Tarankout for the first time on a dirt airstrip, and getting out and just thinking, wow, this is the most exotic, remote, biblical place I've ever seen. It was pretty crazy.
And when you were doing that, I don't know, is it VIP protection? I don't know what you call that mission set, but as you were doing that, did you end up getting into any issues, like either from the planning side, having to deal with senior leaders, or just from a tactical standpoint?
No, it was pretty good. And I think the good part about it is if we knew we were doing one of these jobs, we'd have an advance element go forward like 2 weeks early, and I'd be in that. So we'd have 2 weeks to go and travel the route. We'd see all the bases, and it was super cool just to be in the area, not have a giant military structure hanging over. We were kind of agile. We could go around and we saw most of the major cities in Iraq and Afghanistan in advance of taking these guys there. And what kind of stood out to me is we don't, I think the part that rattled me is we don't have as much control over these battlefields as I thought we would. I thought, being the allies that we are and the Westerners that we are, we would have things under control, but it just wasn't. And you would know that from being there. It was just, there were parts of it that were just completely out of control.
Yeah, you must have been getting almost like threat briefings on every area you were going to consistently, right? So you almost got this full AOR threat picture over time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I remember one of the earlier jobs we did was to kind of Baghdad in the middle of 2006. And it was just a hot mess. It was just, I remember hearing, like, one morning, just you sit there and listen and you can just hear explosions and fighting and bloody rockets. And it was just carnage,
So I was wondering, for a team of like 6 SAS guys
that's right.
How do they feel about doing executive protection when you've got
we all wanted to be
outside the wire?
We were so keen to be, Task Force Black, all the strike stuff going on. We were just throwing our toys out of the cot going, we're getting left behind. But again, we're not serious about warfighting. We're not serious about it because we don't have the assets to do that stuff. We don't have the lift capabilities and the ISR and all that crap you need to do it. We weren't serious about deploying it overseas. So we were part-time kind of warfighters, and that was incredibly frustrating for us. And so we were watching, and at that point we had recommitted to Afghanistan. We had a squadron over there. We didn't have anyone in Iraq. We'd had a squadron in the early part of the invasion, but there was no one else really there. There was some conventional forces, and that was it. But we really wanted to be doing the high precision kind of strike missions and hostage recovery and all that. But we couldn't. But the next best thing was to be there and at least have a look at the place. So if it happened, we were in good shape to do that. We were lucky enough to move around and see the whole place. And
So when you come back from that, I think you've got, do you end up doing 2 more rotations to Afghanistan afterwards? Is that right?
Yeah. So we did, for the first year I was out of training, I did a lot of those, we call them protective security detachments. So a lot of those kind of running the generals and politicians around both theaters. And then the rotations in Oruzgan province were ramping up. It became clear that was where the action was for the unit. And some of the stories coming back were incredible. Like some of the battles the guys were in were pretty full on. And this is in the early days. We didn't really have a lot of lift back then. There wasn't a lot of ISR. It was a lot of vehicle work. We got the long range patrol vehicles we used. There were IEDs, but probably less back then. And so by 2007, I'd been doing this work for a while, and I was now in the running to take a troop over for a combat rotation. And when I was in East Timor, actually, we were there on another kind of recovery mission in 2007. My squadron kind of comes and goes, "Hey, you're in the front seat for a rotation at the end of 2007, and you're going to take a composite team over, and you're going to get a winter rotation almost." And that was the first time I went over.
And you say this is a recovery mission? Is that how you describe it, Mark?
We were after a fugitive in East Timor. This is in East Timor, called Alfredo Renato, who was like a separatist, this super charismatic kind of rebel. And he'd escaped one of the hits we did and was out in the jungle kind of causing a bit of havoc. So we went over to try and get him.
So wait, this is when you were in SAS?
Yeah. So I ended up going back to East Timor 2 more times. Yeah.
And you call it so sorry, when you were saying recovery mission, I was thinking like a downed pilot or something. So this is like a capture.
Yeah. Kill capture mission. Yeah.
Okay. Dang. All right. So that's, you come back from the PSD work in Afghanistan, then you do a rotation or 2 to East Timor.
Yeah.
And then you go back to Afghanistan later.
Yep. 2007.
All right. Yeah. So the East Timor trip again, I don't know how much you can talk about tracking down this individual, but what was that like for you?
That was another funny one. And my friend was leading the team there and I was the targeting officer, but I did the targeting, but I would throw my gear on and go out on every job just as a kind of bolt on. But I mean, we were having real trouble trying to find this guy, because the assets we throw at close in targeting and intel. You would know this more than anyone. Doing it in the jungle was quite hard, and we just didn't have all the assets to do it. Like Australia, we're just not equipped for some of this stuff, and we're slowly getting there, but it's been a long, painful road. And I think that, again, the force structure is changing again for more of the kind of state on state stuff. But back then, trying to do targeting missions for one guy in the jungle was quite hard.
And targeting, just for people who aren't familiar, we're talking about building a targeting package, like where this guy is going to be, how you're going to access this individual, basically.
How are you going to get in there? Like, we're trying to fly into jungles at night with clouds and treetops and mountains. Like, it was super dangerous.
Mark, I mean, I think it's cool that you ended up bolting on to that, but when they're going in and you hit a dry hole, are they like, way to go, Mark? Great targeting package, man.
You should have been you should have been back at base doing your homework.
Oh man. All right. So did you get into any fights during that trip?
In the first hit they went up against, and I missed this by like 2 days because I was coming back from Turkey on another job. They went and hit his kind of building with him and a bunch of his followers, and I think 2 or 3 of his followers were killed, and he got away. So that was the first kind of chance we had to get him, and we screwed that one up. So, and we spent the next kind of 4 or 5 months trying to find him.
Damn.
Yeah.
All right. If we then move to, I don't know when this is, the first time you're on a mission and you're in a gunfight, if we could, is that Afghanistan in 2007?
Yeah.
Can you talk us through, are you a troop commander at the time? Where are you at in Afghanistan, as much as you can say? And then what was that like for you?
Yeah. So we flew into Oruzgan province, Tarinkout. This is kind of just north of Helmund. Australia has a base there. We were co-located with Dutch and some Americans, but mostly Dutch. Kind of a forgotten patch of Afghanistan, because it's in the south, but not south on the border of Pakistan. But a lot of Taliban would move from the north through us to get to the south. A lot of weapons as well. And so there was a valley north of us called the Chura Valley. It's kind of like 10 miles north of us. That we had so many troubles trying to recapture. They'd done 2 clearances of it in 2006. The Dutch had fired 155 rounds indiscriminately into the valley. There was so many enemy in there. Pretty full, like World War I stuff. And our guys had been involved in one really heavy clearance called Op Perth, where they'd run a couple of AC-130s dry over the targets. Yeah, so like really heavy enemy contacts in there. And a couple of guys wounded. One of my mates lost some of his jaw from an RPG round. And this is all coming back to us. We're like, this is a serious fight. Like, these guys aren't some mountain boys. They're real fighters. And so I went back with my team, and the commander of the South, RC South, said, I want Chura cleared, and I'm going to make it my priority, and I'm going to throw my reserve force at it, which was a Gurkha battalion. And so we said, hey, we'll do the advanced force work. We'll go out, we'll map the valley out, we'll tell you where the enemy are, we'll go on recon the whole place. And so I went out with my troop, and we spent 2 weeks, day and night. We were either in observation posts by day, and by night we're on foot in teams of 6 going through the valley to try and find where the enemy were. And that's really classic close country reconnaissance for us. Like, that's one of the things I think we do better than anyone, and that's completely undetected, going into enemy territory and finding out where they are. And so we did that repeatedly for 2 weeks. There was one contact during that time where we ran into 3 guys that came out at night that they all had weapons, and my guys, there was one patrol, I wasn't in it, but they shot those 3 guys, and they had PKM RPG. So yeah, so they had some heavy stuff, right? Yeah. And we knew that they knew there was going to be a clearance, and so they were putting IEDs in them, preparing the ground. And so we got ready for when the clearance was going to happen. It was going to be early morning. we were going to go and mark the landing zones. We're going to secure the area, make sure there weren't any heavy weapons there. And the Gurkhas were going to come in. We were going to land, put them in their form-up points, and then we're going to go off and start the clearance. And then I had a plan to pick my team up and go a bit further south, away from all the commotion, to an ambush location, because we knew there was high activity zone, plenty of enemy there. And by day, we were going to hit these forces. And so we left and did the mission. We walked in at night. Took us all night to kind of get in. It was all quiet, and we were in position. Gurkha forces landed kind of 2 Chinooks at a time. They were dropping a company at a time. We were receiving the forces and sending him on the way. We ran behind time. And so as we were getting ready in daylight to move towards our ambush zone, I was like, it's a bit hairy because it's daylight now. But I thought, let's just keep going because we're going to get away from all the friendlies that are here. As I was moving along this, we're moving along this river. I've got a sniper team up on my left, about 1,000 meters away as fire support. We've got 2 Apaches overhead. They were Brit Apaches. And we came up against a cornfield, and it was super weird because by now there was nothing in the valley, but there was also no pattern of life. And we're like, this is, everyone's gone to ground here. This is super dangerous. We could just feel it. And my first team came up against that cornfield, and the team commander spotted someone or something in the cornfield, and then a bunch of shots rang out, and that was the opening kind of gunfire of what became a 12-hour battle. And so I was up with my team. I was right up close with him, and I jumped forward and was in a ditch and just trying to survive the early part of that battle because there was a lot of fire coming back, and they were quite close. And I had a grenade launch out of 203. And so I started firing back. I was firing this 203 back. And people had always said, even in training, they're like, officers, that you don't fight back, but you might not get a choice, right? You might be so close to enemy, you're going to be fine, same as everyone else. And so I was responding with gunfire. Everyone else was shooting back in the cornfield. And I had a JTAC with me. He was an SAS qualified guy. He was calling in the Apaches on the far side of that cornfield, and they were doing some. They were using the 20mm cannon along there, and a couple of Hellfires. They were hitting guys that were on the far side of the cornfield, and I'd never been that close to ground fire, and it was bloody loud, and it was pretty close to. I was shitting myself because even the Hellfire, like just the sound of that thing. Because you're not fully expecting, you're kind of like shooting back and then you hear this god awful explosion. And so I could see where they were hitting. It was probably the 20mm was probably hitting about 80 or 100 meters away, so pretty close. And I was like, shit, they're actually really close to us. But one of my guys had been shot in the opening minutes of that battle. Matthew Locke, he was really seasoned sergeant, really good fighter. He was only 33, but he'd been shot kind of high and left on his chest, and was unconscious. He was badly wounded, badly wounded. So we were kind of pinned. We were stuck there while we were trying to treat Matthew, call in fire, deal with the Taliban here. I knew they were going to try and flank us around the south. So the snipers were firing to cut guys that were coming around to cut us off. So it was busy. And I was sitting there just going, holy shit, I'm in over my head here. And I've gotten my whole team in over our heads. And, but we kind of, we stuck at it. We had to pull Matthew back. We got the AME guys to fly in and pick Matthew up, and they were pretty ballsy pilots. They did a really good job. And I think, I know the AME Blackhawks have much better avionics from what I've heard, but they were just incredible. They just dropped out of the sky and we picked him up. But that was the opening kind of couple of hours of this battle. And just after that, I was like, holy shit, these guys don't care that we're better equipped, that we have aircraft, that we have indirect fire. They just don't care. They're happy to fight.
Damn.
Yeah, so it was like, it was a hell of an experience. I'll never forget that.
Shit. All right, so just so that I don't get hate mail later, it's a 30mm cannon
30mm.
on
Sorry.
the Apache.
Sorry.
So that I need to continue getting Christmas cards from my Apache brethren.
We can't have a puny 20mm supporting us. Yeah, sorry. The 30mm, yeah.
No. When you say the Gurkha, who are you talking about?
So the Royal Gurkha Regiment, which is a British Gurkha Regiment. So led by British officers, but Nepalese soldiers. And, we saw them run off they ran off the Chinooks, all these kind of little guys, kind of 4 foot, 5 foot tall guys with it. And they had the kukri knives, like those massive knives. Yeah. They all had them with them. So, they were ready to go.
So you've got like a sniper team up ahead. It's a small unit. You got a guy who's injured immediately. It's daytime. Is that right?
Early morning. Yep.
Yeah. You're coordinating air support, both medevac and gunships. So that's a lot going on for your first engagement, right? Yeah. Did you really feel like you had led them into a bad spot? Or, I mean, it sounds like this is what you were trying to do, no?
Yeah, it's funny because I remember when we put those parts out on the kind of chessboard, we're like, we'll have the snipers here and we'll have the aircraft here. And I'm like, if we get in trouble, we're covered, right? We've got options. But then when I got in trouble, I was like, oh my God, this is worse than I thought it was going to be. But I think the fact that we got out of it intact and no one else was hurt was because that we had planned it well, even though I think it was probably a tactical error on my part, just because you're not fully aware of how dangerous that green belt can be when you haven't come up against it. But after that, I was very cautious. And I stuck to nighttime. It was pretty close.
And you said that was a 12-hour fight in the end?
The opening part of it took about 2 hours to kind of fight, move Matthew out, get back to a compound. And then the battle continued all through that day. And we were kind of in helping clear compounds. And then we picked up just before dusk and started our move out. And we spent most of the night trying to get out.
When you finally got back to wherever it was after that, kind of back to safety, what was going through your head?
Oh, I knew we'd survived, but I was also, the fact that I knew Matthew was dead, that was hard because when we went back, one of my mates back there was a experienced kind of warrant officer too. And he was a really good mate of Matt's. And when I got back, I was like, mate, I'm sorry. And it was so hard. It was really, I was so upset. And he was really good about it. He goes, mate, it's war. That's what happens. So don't feel like that was your fault. It's just, that stuff can happen no matter how well you plan things. He was really good about it.
Damn. Okay. That's a tough opening to a deployment.
Very tough.
Okay. There was something that you mentioned in the book that I just wanted to ask about. I can't remember if I got the exact. You said you weren't yet fluent in the language of the unconscious body, right? As you're moving around the battlefield. Can you just talk a little bit about what that means as you say it?
Yeah, there are certain cues that you'll see or hear or pick up on that will make you feel uneasy, even though you don't know why. And it's because I think the unconscious mind knows that there are certain things that just don't conform to the patterns that you're used to seeing. So it could be something as simple as the way a person looks at you before they walk around a corner, or the way someone folds their hands, or the way you see someone speak to their friend. Things as small as that can tell you a story. And on their own, they may not mean anything. But together with a lot of other signs, they can really paint a picture about what's happening in front of you. And I don't think I was fully sensitive to that at the start, or if I was sensitive, I perhaps ignored it. But over time, I came to rely on that as one of my greatest strengths, is the ability to look at people and to know exactly what they were thinking based on the tiny things they were doing, how they stood, how they fold their arms, if they look at you when they talk. All these little things tell your story. And so, I learned to pay attention. Yeah.
How long do you feel like it took you to develop that skill?
Not that long, I don't think. I think enough time. I think I had a good baseline because I worked with people that I knew and trust and believed in. So that's a really good baseline to have. And then when you deal with people that aren't necessarily trustworthy or have questionable intentions, then you kind of know, you have a better idea of what's good. So that gives you gives you an idea of when there's a question mark over other people. So I feel like that skill came quickly, especially in warfighting.
Yeah. And then if I can't imagine that you have something even crazier than that, but if you look forward to that, the rest of that deployment or the following one, if you think back to one of the more dangerous or difficult experiences you had, where was that and what was that like?
So there was another time we went all the way out to the Helmund River, and we were kind of troop formation, this time our long range patrol vehicles, which are pretty well armed. Actually, we've got heavy weapons, rocket launchers, 84 mil, the whole thing. Really good air support because we got joint the JTACs are with us, so they're pretty quick to call in air support. We had the Dutch with self-propelled 155 mil artillery not far away, and so where we went into, it was called Darawad. Coalition forces had not been there for a really long time. And when we got there, there was a handful of basically Al-Qaeda guys, basically foreign fighters, a couple of Chechens, a few Pakistanis that had been organizing the battle. And these guys were really good. They had all their shit together. They had all their ammunition brought forward. They had defense in depth. They had mortars. They had rockets. They had heavy dushka. They had a bit of everything, and they were ready for us. And so we spent 2 weeks going up and down the banks of the Helmund, just duking it out with these guys. And this time we really lent heavily on American air power, because just once you bring that stuff to the party, you can really do some damage. And so we were using I think it was the B1s, right? They're the Lancers. Yeah, we're bringing the Lancers in to do some bombing runs. Yeah. I can, one of the most impressive things I've seen is the airstrikes from those guys. And I remember seeing a couple of 2,000 pounders drop, and I was like, if this is precision bombing, I would hate to see like unrestrained bombing would just be a spectacle. But yeah, that really tilted the balance. We're able to make a big dent on these guys without really having to dismount, go right into the green belt where we're going to be up close fighting and possibly losing guys. So our job was to sit there and hold them for a couple of weeks while the Brits were doing a clearance in Musakala, not far away.
Dang.
Yeah, it was full on.
Did you know that you were going into an area with that type of enemy posture? Or did you learn that as you were engaging, as you were moving?
We knew there was a lot of enemy there, and they were pretty well organized. But then when we got there, I was like, oh god, these guys really want to play, and they were more excited than anyone. And we would hear them day after day talking about what they were going to do and any mistakes they'd made that day. And it's pretty. Some of it's quite funny, just hearing them carry on the radios, telling each other off and. But I was lucky. We were lucky to get away with that one. There were IEDs all over that place, and we didn't hit one, so we were pretty lucky.
Damn. Right. I don't want to take up all your time here, Mark. So I want to talk about initiatives you're doing today as well. And there is a lot to cover, and it's actually very entertaining from my perspective. But I do know.
Sorry, I remember the name of that colonel. It's Bob Haskell.
Yep. So he was. Yeah. So we were, just for those listening, Mark and I were talking before we started recording, and I was just relaying the unit when I left the 101st. We had just come back from Afghanistan. I left, and the unit was redeploying to Afghanistan, and I think it was 2009, 2010. And they worked with you guys, and every time I talk to them, they cannot say, it's just always like, it was the best deployment. You missed it. It was great. It was all these SAS guys. They always wanted to go out and do hits. And Colonel Haskell, he was my battalion commander when I rotated out. So it's a small world.
Yeah. And we had such a good relationship with those guys. And like I was saying, we brought them over to the bar a few times, which was a big deal for them. They weren't necessarily allowed to do it, but we certainly got on the cans with them a few times. It was good fun.
That's awesome. That is awesome. All right. I do know as you described leaving the military, it's a pretty difficult transition, as it is for many people. But I mean, you've seen a lot the multiple deployments. Can you just talk through what that was like for you coming out of the military, frustrated, what it was like trying to land on the other side?
Yeah, I'd done all those deployments. So I did that 2007 one, then I did a heap more until 2010. And so by the time I kind of left the unit, I was pretty exhausted. And I went back to that Duntroon, that training establishment, to be an instructor, which was actually a really good kind of loop to go on, because I went back and was able to share my experience. And when you're young and training, that's all you want to hear. You just want someone to kind of tell you about what it's like and, what to do. So it was good. It was a good way to go, but I knew as well, I'm like, God, I'm so exhausted, and that really damaged me. And I'd had this idea about going to the US. Even when I was a kid, I wanted to go over and play football. I never got to. I played too much John Madden when I was a kid, but I never got to go back. But now I was an adult, I'm like, oh, maybe I can go back. Because like I was saying, I visited New York and I just loved the US. I love that you guys lead a lot of industries. Your mindset around what's possible is exciting. And so for me, I thought, wow, maybe I can switch careers. If I go to a really good school and I get the right training and education, maybe I can switch careers and have a whole new career. And so once that thought had taken root, I really got excited about it. I'm like, actually, I think maybe I can do this. And I started doing my homework about where might be a good place to go in the US. And I knew the MBA programs over there had, like, you could do 2-year full-time programs. And there were some really good ones in the Northeast and on the West Coast. There's so many good schools in the US. So I had the idea about applying to it, and it was pretty scary, because I knew if I didn't get it, I could potentially compromise my career as well. So I was trying to apply to US business schools in secret, while I'm also trying to do my day job and hold my career together. And there's just people in Australia don't understand what those schools are like. Unless you're high in the corporate sector, you probably never heard of a lot of them in Australia. So when I was trying to explain to people, I'm trying to get to a US business school, hopefully an Ivy League one, people just had no idea what I was trying to do. And there was no real support there. So I was working hard to try and make all that happen and do the GMAT and all that stuff. So, it just took forever to try and make it work. And eventually I was able to do the scores, sat the GMAT a bunch of times, and eventually got the right applications. Sammy, my wife, eventually got the application done and was able to head over. And it was an easy choice. Once I'd been accepted to Wharton, I was more than happy to go.
And that's no joke. I mean, that's got to be top 5 business school in this country.
Yeah, it was. I knew it was a good school, but I don't think I realized just how good it was until I got there. I was like, holy shit, this is really good. Yeah.
God, it must have, like, the caliber of other students there must have just been off the charts. Probably reminded you of SAS, I would imagine.
It was great, and so varied too, like so many different walks of life. And everyone was so nice. Like, you're in the military, people are like the hard asses, right? It's a hard place it's a hard environment. And I wouldn't call it the friendliest workplace in the world, And then I got to business school and I was like, these people are so nice. It was exciting.
Why did you have to do it in secret? I don't think I'm tracking that. Is it because you were still in, so you wanted to make sure you landed at a business school before you exited the military?
Yeah, I was still in, but if I had let anyone know that I was looking at an alternative career, it would have set me back against some of my peers, for example, because we're still competing for spots in the army for squadron command or whatever.
How hard was it for you mentally to make the break? Like, all right, I'm going to head out and leave this career behind me.
Once I got accepted, it was easy, but leading up to it, there was that thought of, holy shit, I worked so hard to get this career going. Am I really going to do this? Am I really going to throw this away to do something completely different and to start again? Really, I'll be going to the bottom of the stack. I don't know much about business at all. And just that, trying to get my brain restarted around just critical comprehension and maths and all this shit that I'd never done for 10, 15 years. It was like trying to restart the old diesel motor. It's, a bit rusty. So yeah, it just took a lot of work, but it was totally worth it.
And then a lot happens after this, right? So you write a book, you found a company, you're on TV a couple times. You work at McKinsey. Like, what's the driving force for you there? Because as a kid, you're looking to get into the military, SAS, you do all that. How do you kind of reinvent that new path for yourself?
Yeah, when I was at school, I didn't know what I was going to do after school, but I knew I had kind of 2 years to learn and think about it and all that. So I knew I wanted to do my own company because I just love that small team stuff and being creative and different. And I'd come up with that idea for Kill Kapture because I thought, how are we going to explain what it was like to be overseas and at war and in these teams? And I thought, actually, a brand is actually a pretty cool way to do it because there's so many different ways to tell that story. You can do it with video or products. And so to me, that was exciting. But I also knew it wasn't going to pay the bills for quite a while. So that's why I was applying to the consulting firms. I was applying to the top consulting firms because I was like, I can do 2 or 3 years there. And that's a bit more time to think about what else I want to do. And so I had worked hard to apply for McKinsey and was, again, pretty lucky to, it was good. I worked hard, so I did the work, but it is hard to get in. And I was glad I got there because it gave me another 2 years to kind of keep working on Kill Kapture and think about what I want to do next. And just randomly, when I was in New York, I think it was in a New York winter, and I'd seen the ad for Australian Survivor. And I was like, holy shit, I could totally do that. Go hang out on a beach for a while and that'd be so much fun. And so I applied to that. And again, the Survivor franchise, I had no idea how much of a big deal it was because it kind of come out when I joined the army. So I hadn't seen a lot of it, but I knew it was the original kind of game reality show. But it was so good to be involved with it. It was such a cool game.
I mean, you got to fact check me here, but this is where you meet your wife, right?
Yeah. Yep.
On the
Sam
show.
and I met on the show. Showmans.
And how mentally difficult was it compared to selection?
It was super weird because when we got there, I was like, we've got this team, there's like 11 or 12 of us, and they're all totally different to me. Totally different. They're all either young kids or all, old accountant and used to these military teams. And I was like, oh my God, what have I done? So it was I knew I couldn't really trust anyone, but I'd met Sammy and really liked her, and I trusted her as well. So we stuck together, and it was just good to kind of fend for each other, look out for each other while all this kind of carry-on's going on in the game. But even just being involved in a TV production was cool because you realize it's just entertainment, right? I took it seriously, but it's just entertainment. These people do such a great job at bringing this to life.
Oh man, how long are you immersed in that?
Oh, it took a good 3 or 4 weeks to get ready for it, and then maybe 3 or 4 weeks to audition and apply for it. And then once we were out there, I was out there. I got kicked out about a third of the way through, but even that took a month. Like each episode you see is about 3 days worth of filming. So it's it's a lot of work. Yeah, it's a lot goes on for each episode.
Damn. All right. Yeah. So you, at this point in your life, it's like you've never failed, basically. What was it like getting kicked off of that show?
Oh yeah, I knew I was in trouble because they'd kicked Sammy out, and we were like a tight pair. And by now we were 3 weeks in. I'd been polite to everyone, and now I was like, you know what, fuck these guys. I'm gonna go and get them all. And so I went after the guys that kicked her out, and I kind of lost the battle because I didn't have a big enough coalition with me. So it was, but it was really good. It was really good fun. And I think most people that go on say that it can be tricky psychologically because you're getting lied to a lot, and it's a bit traumatic, but super fun.
Sounds a lot like CIA training. It's a lot of being lied to in games.
I wouldn't be surprised. And the treachery of that, world is just it's unbelievable. Yeah.
Both.
Some of it's necessary, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
So I will say I did not know until I was doing my research that you were on Eco Challenge. And I watched that with the family. That thing was awesome and brutal at this. Like people were getting hypothermia and completely getting knocked out of this thing. I did not realize you and your wife were on that, right?
Yeah, we Samantha is an adventure athlete, an endurance runner. It's kind of her main job, really. And she had seen this. They were re-raising Eco Challenge, which used to be one of the original shows.
It was big back in the day.
Yeah, it used to be huge. And I watched some of the old things. I'm like, no way, we've got to do this. So we put forward a team. We got picked to do it. We trained up. It was probably like part-time training for about 6 months at least. Got all our equipment together and we flew out to Fiji. And we saw the course. It was like 700 kilometers, some really rough terrain. And there's one part where you had to walk out about 10 kilometers across boulders to this 300-meter high waterfall. Once you climb that, you're on the tallest part of Fiji. It's about 2,000 meters up, and it was freezing up there. And so once we got up the top, we had to go through a river system for about 5 kilometers, and that's where everyone was getting hypothermia because we were really beaten up by that point. And people were getting in that water, and by the time they got out, they were hypothermic, and that happened to a lot of teams. And it was brutal. It was just brutal. I remember the organizer of the race are like, checkpoint 22, that's your Waterloo. If you get there, you've broken the back of it. And we made it just.
I mean, the river section that you're talking about, like you're in water, like cold river
submerged.
Water.
Yeah.
For hours, it seemed like.
Yeah, I turned around and the cameraman that was following us was hypothermic. And I was like, oh, we're in trouble here.
Oh, dang. That looked like one of the hardest things I'd ever seen people do. And some of them, like the professional team, not pro teams, but the folks who have done that over and over, it's amazing what you can do in that.
Yeah. Some of those top teams are incredible. They're not even super fast. They keep going and they don't stop. Like they rarely sleep. They just go 23 hours a day for 10 days. And that's why they win. They just keep going.
And how did that feel for you? Like, I mean, for you having done selection, which has to be the hardest thing physically, mentally, like what was that like in comparison?
Yeah, it was easier than that because we weren't really carrying weight. I had like 13 kilos in my pack. So it was just a matter of, it's actually technical. There's a lot of technical skills you need to do the training. You need to operate your mountain bike and know how to climb and look after your feet. So there were new skills in adventure racing that I had to kind of relearn. But I was the only guy on my team that hadn't done adventure racing. And I was kind of worried about, I'm going to do something wrong and let the team down. But it ended up being a pretty good race. We kind of stuck together, and the feet was the big one in the jungle. If your feet went bad, you wouldn't be able to race. So luckily we kept it together.
So my wife and I, we can't like get in a kayak together and the marriage survived. So like, how the hell did you do that, man?
We said that, well, this is going to be hard, but the good thing is we're a team of 4. So
yeah,
we were like kept it pretty professional, and there's enough people that was kind of the circuit breakers, and I can complain to someone else about my wife without shouting at her or anything.
Oh, that's awesome. All right. I've taken up a lot of your time. I do want to just make sure I plug again, the book Survivor is really great. I think you cover not just not easy, but you cover the hard times, very self-deprecating, but also some great life lessons in there. Kill Kapture, you've referenced it a couple times. For those who aren't familiar, could you just give them a rundown of what it is? It's pretty cool online. So I just wanted to.
So Kill Kapture is basically, we're a tough luxury e-commerce brand. I wanted to take the kind of the best of special ops outerwear and kind of take those design features and put it into streetwear. So it's a streetwear brand. Everything's handmade in New York City or other states in the US. And we sell direct to consumer. So it's a lot of fun. We're still making stuff, still building products. So check it out. It's
got a badass looking jacket that I think I'm buying for somebody that I know coming up. It's really cool looking. Anyway, and watches on there. It's really neat. And then there are just 2 questions I like to ask everybody, Mark, and I'll get you out of here in a sec. The first one is, when you were going on your combat missions, was there anything you carried with you that had sentimental value, was a good luck charm you always wanted to have with you?
So I had probably I had the same dog tags that I had since I started training. I had 2 dog tags. So I had one on my boot and one around my neck. And I think I knew that was something that I would, if I survived the war, I would hand down to my kids or grandkids or whatever. So to me, it was cool to have the same dog tags through my whole career. And yeah, they were probably the things that I made sure I had on me all the time. I actually had one other thing. This is a really weird story, just quickly. I had the name of a firefighter from New York that died in the Twin Towers. I had on a bracelet I bought in New York, and I cut it off. His name was Dan Marino. And I put it on my weapon, and I wrote to his wife. I found his website, wrote to his wife and said, "Hey, I got your husband's name on my rifle. Hope you don't mind." She's like, "Of course." And years later, when I went back to New York, 7 or 8 years later, I spent a couple of days looking for apartments I was going to try and rent. And I must have looked at 20 apartments, and I eventually settled on one in Hell's Kitchen. And that year they had the September 11 commemoration. I went downstairs and checked, and sure enough, it was the same firehouse that Dan Marino was from. I'd ended up basically next door to him after all that time. And it kind of made sense to me. I'm like, yeah, it makes sense that I would go full circle and end up close to this guy after all those years.
That's really cool. What a small world.
Yeah, it's mad.
And then just the last one, if knowing what you know now, looking back at all the deployments and losing people and the sacrifice, would you go back and do it all again?
Yeah, I would go back, because it's just, as hard as some of it is, it's just, it was such a good thing to be a part of, and the teams and the people, and you really do see the best in humans. You see the worst as well, but you really do see the best in people. So such a great experience.
And I got to say, I'm a big fan of the background with the Apache picture back there that you've got. I don't know if you got that just for me, but
they're yours. They're your Apaches, and one Black Hawk there as well. So
love it. Love it. All right. Well, I really appreciate the time, Mark. I've got links to all the places people can find you. Is there anything else that you're working on in your superhuman time that you'd like to share before we wrap here?
Oh, not at the moment. I'm just taking a breath after doing that book, so I'm just gonna chill for a bit. But thanks so much for having me. It's been great, and so good to see that we've our worlds have overlapped before, and I'm sure we'll keep doing that.
So true. Thanks a lot, Mark. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Ron.
I hope you enjoyed this combat story. People often write to me with incredible stories and suggestions for interviews. If you want to share a combat story of your own or from someone you served with, record yourself for up to 5 minutes and email it to ryan@combatstory.com. I'll select some of these stories and feature them at the end of our episodes. Thanks for listening. Stay safe.